Hello, everyone, and welcome back to SaaS Showdown. I'm Rose Layton, and this is my partner in crime.
Colin McCarthy, great to be back here again, Rose.
Good to see you, Colin. And today we have somebody with us from an organization called DoControl. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Rose. My name is Matt, so I am the Director of Cloud Alliances at DuControl. DuControl is a SaaS Security Posture Management solution. We'll get into that, but I'll pass it back to you, Rose.
Yeah. Obviously, like we brought you onto the podcast because you're in a space that's important to our listeners and to us as we're thinking about SaaS and how we manage SaaS on a day-to-day. But I think it's still one of those areas where we don't know what we don't know, and the space is moving rapidly, and the problems that people are having are being solved quickly, but also new problems are cropping up all the time. So I think it's a really interesting space. So with that, do you want to tell us a little bit about DoControl and how the company got started and what problems it was created to solve?
Yeah, so I'll start from the beginning. So our founder, Adam Gavish, so he previously worked at Google. So he worked for Google DLP. He was part of a big GovCloud project. And at the end of every day, his team and the security team would come to him and say, hey, you're working with all these third-party vendors, all these contractors. Did you remove access to all the sensitive files that you had with them? And he was like, no, I didn't. So he's up late at night, looking at all the files, removing access. You get the story pretty quickly. That starts to add up pretty quickly. Our other founder was working for a company that he was acquired by. He was in Japan on some work trip, and he hit, someone shared with him like the P&L of the company that just got acquired. He hit request for access, but on his phone, his default email is his Gmail account, his personal Gmail account. Yeah. Boom, quickly, P&L is like quickly accessed by his personal Gmail account. Obviously, that's a big no-no. They were friends. They actually both recognized the same issue, started the company, and we are where we are today. So foundational layer is SaaS data is often overexposed, and there's limited ways and not easy ways to control that and see it. So that's like early stages how the company started. So what does DuControl do? Go ahead, Colin.
Oh no, I was going to say it's great to hear. Oh, here's a cat. Sorry, it's great to hear that there was a real issue that they discovered and had themselves, and then created the application to solve that problem that they were facing.
Yeah, it's a little bit like an aha moment when they're like, "Oh wow, we both faced the same issue and completely different organizations, different sizes, different industries, but the same problem persisted." So at a high level, what is DuControl? So DuControl, as we said, is a SaaS Security Posture Management solution. Big fancy word where it really is we protect data, sensitive data in corporate SaaS applications. And where does DuControl really focus? I'll kind of break it into 3 areas and then 3 sub areas. 1, we give visibility into the exposure of a SaaS application. 2, we give remediation. And then 3rd, we give the ability to do alerts. So under the exposure, I kind of break it into a couple buckets. So let's use Google Workspace as an example. Let's say you integrate Google Workspace. 1, we're going to get visibility into public exposure, external exposure, former employees with access, my drive access, shared drive access, all these different things. The second thing we'll give you visibility into is shadow apps, so OAuth tokens, or applications that are integrated with your Google Workspace environment through your Google permission credentials. So think about, let's say Calendly, for example. Most people are using Calendly. Great, it's connected to your calendar, has read-write access, not a problem. But a random third-party application that someone goes and downloads that's not approved from the dark web that now has read-write access to your entire environment, that's obviously a big no-no. Mm-hmm. The fourth piece we give visibility to is what we call identity user risk. So we don't just integrate with, let's say, Google Workspace. We also integrate with a Workday, a HiBob, SuccessFactors, an Okta. So other SaaS applications that allows us to give us business context into a user to help us actually score a user and how risky they are with the organization. So someone who just put in their 2-week notice is obviously at high risk, or someone who just put on a PIP plan that then goes share as much of data with their personal email. That's a high risk event that allows us to make better decisions on what a risky event is. And the fourth piece that we give visibility to is misconfigurations. So making sure there's not overprivileged access to an application in, let's say, Google Workspace. And then within all those, each one of those pillars, we can do remediation and then alerts off that. So security-based alerts based off the risk of an event, and then remediation. So we can remediate any type of policy and do historical and go forward remediation. So we can do something called bulk remediation. So in real time, put a filter. Everyone that has access to a Gmail account, remove access. Or what we call workflows, which is policy enforcement, future remediation. So being able to say, anytime there's a file shared to a Gmail account that contains PII and that employee is on a PIP plan, block that action and then create a security ticket. Just an example in this scenario. So I'll pause there. Any questions so far? Any comments, Colin, Rose?
Yeah, my mind is going, through all the steps that an admin would have to go through to like do the security of those things manually, and the visibility that they may or may not get through the Google admin panel or any other platform that they have.
I find myself also considering like the context admins have in their organization. Like I'm one of those people who like kind of collects knowledge about my users in my head, and I just kind of keep it there, right? And I make decisions based on what I know about these people. And I think it's interesting that like you can tie those things together, right? Like you've said, to make a more informed risk decision, right? Like it's not necessarily such a big deal if we've got an employee who's doing something, but if that employee has just put in their 2 weeks, that's a problem, right? Whereas like normally that's something an admin has to know or confirm or think of in their head, or they just sort of have to blanket catalog all of those events as potentially risky, and then you have to filter them out afterwards. So I think that's a fascinating layer to add to the puzzle.
Yeah, it's being able to be aware of that user and look out for those behaviors and then do an action on it. Mm-hmm. And we know that OAuth is a wonderful tool. It'll gives you easy access to sign into so many platforms without a separate username and password. But then we do know that there can be some, even not malicious services, but there's some services out there that, over request or the permissions are over provisioned, and it does give us admins visibility into what's being asked and what's been allowed. I know there's very few admins that probably disable all OAuth authentication and only allow approved ones that have been added to the allow list. Unless you're starting from a greenfield domain and you're just moved to Google Workspace, it's very difficult to have those controls retrospectively, because for a long time established Google Workspace domains, we didn't really get those controls. Until,
some of the information that's available
today
you just didn't have when we started.
Yeah, and it's actually, I know we're going to date this podcast, but Google actually launched an update today to give admins even better granular control over what is allowed to third-party apps through the API access. I think there's an open beta that we can put in the show notes. So, yeah, it's getting easier natively for admins, but a very much a big risk.
So we touched on this just a little bit, I pointed out something that I felt was unique, but how do you feel that DuControl takes a unique approach to this authorization and orchestration and alerting? Like what is, what's the bread and butter, right? Like what's your specific thing?
Yeah, so I'll break it into 3 key pieces. I think the first piece is the inventory we're able to collect. So what we do is, as I said, we're not just integrating with the data security app that you're trying to protect. We integrate with also those other applications on top of that, so we can build a true inventory of your data. And the difference is often from a lot of our, let's say, competitors in the market is we have a push-based architecture. So in essence, we're reacting to the SaaS event in near real time. So seconds after that event or that trigger happens. As in some of the other players, there's something called a pull-based approach. So scanning the database every hour, 2 hours, whatever you set as your trigger. Meaning if someone shared something and then the policy is running, you might have to wait an hour or two before that remediation action is taken. DuControl is reacting to that event in that near real time, to that event occurring. Second is, I think, and Rose, you hit on it perfectly. And Colin, I'll pause. I see you're about to jump in.
No, I was just gonna say that there is as you say, there's two ways of doing that alerting, the pull and the push. And I think a lot of the established players relied on the pull because there wasn't, it's probably like the REST or whatever those other new APIs allowed you to do those push notifications. And I know a lot of the players have really struggled, certainly with large domains and the amount of changes that take place, to actually give you accurate information as it happens. Because for a lot of
lot of data intake.
And so
for sure.
if you have a lot of clients doing a lot of changes, you can have billions of permission changes happening maybe not every second. Hopefully, if you have a lot of clients, every hour. But trying to index them and then give them back to the user. I know historically I've struggled with some of that and some of the platforms that I've played with in the past.
It is a massive challenge. Kudos to our engineering team. We've spent a lot of time mastering the APIs of all these different SaaS applications. And it's a continuous effort because it doesn't, as you said, it doesn't stop. These APIs are changing continuously. And the models behind them and how we kind of master them is a very complex project. And it's not easy. It's actually, it seems easy when you think about it, but it's a very complex. The APIs and the hardest part is the APIs for, let's say, Google Workspace versus Salesforce, completely different. And the data infrastructures are very different. So you have to find a way to correlate that and centralize that into a SaaS data layer that makes sense from a security perspective.
Anyway, are we at step 2 of 3?
Step 2, we're at step 2 now. So the step 2, and I think Rose, you hit on it, is the business context. So our ability to integrate with these HR and these IDP tools like an Okta, like a Azure Directory, SuccessFactors, Bamboo HR, allows us to have a really low false positives in our alert infrastructure. So we're able to actually give alerts that are meaningful and actually actionable for an end user to say, okay, just because the marketing team is sharing something externally, they're probably sharing it with like a PR agency. That's okay. That's just how they need to work day to day. But as I said, a sales rep who just put in their 2-week notice, who downloads or shares their customer list to their personal email, that's obviously a big red flag, a big no-no. And we can start to differentiate that through the data that we're getting from the HR and the IDP tools. And I think the last piece is it's kind of our easy use. So our ability to, one, have the API-based integrations. We have no proxy. We have no agent. It's fully agentless. The integrations are a matter of 10, 15 seconds to integrate, and then the data starts to populate, and for minutes, you start to get your full exposure. And the workflows are fully drag and drop, no code. It's relatively easy for an admin and smaller, let's say, security teams without a bunch of resources to go and implement. You can start to kind of really build your SaaS data security layer pretty quickly with something like DuControl.
It's interesting how you mentioned no code. Rose and I discussed that a couple of weeks ago. It is the new way of doing things, and I've seen some of the newer players do have the sort of established templates, and the sort of standard icons for dragging in and creating your workflows, where some of the existing players, it's very much, this is what we think you're going to do. This is like the set actions, and this is the flow, and it is very difficult to adapt your environment to meet the tool. Do you think it's or have you been able to attack it in a different way due to the technology that you're using, or being able to keep up to date with some of these no code probably engines that are out there to make things easier?
I think we've been able to stay up to date with the market, and we do have, as you said, not the legacy way, but we have hundreds of out of the box playbooks that are standard use cases that people are doing, like third to fourth party sharing or encryption keyed uploads, stuff like that. Those are standard things that most companies are just kind of enabling, just because that's just the standard use cases that you want to have set up. But every day with the customer, you're there thinking of new use cases that you could never think of. And that's where I think having the modernized approach to the drag and drop workflows with the easy icons where they can just drag and drop and put in their enforcement is crucial. And I think the layer, as I keep hitting on it, is the business context layer, that we're able to add that step into a workflow to say, grab this data from Bamboo HR and tell me if this employee is inactive or not, or they're on a PIP or whatever, can be put into a workflow, as well as not just integrations from the SaaS apps, we're also integrating, for example, let's say Google Workspace, for example, with their Google DLP native. So with their Google data classification layer, we can take their Google labels and then make decisions off that. So our workflows have that drag and drop functionality, but with the business context and with the data layer we're able to bring in, it adds so many different layers to it. You can really get as granular as you need to be to ensure your workflows are actually actioning on the things that you care about and not causing false positives for your business. And the last thing I do want to add to that is we do have a layer within the workflows that we can add. That's a end user engagement step. So in essence, via Slack, via email, via Teams, via chat, you can say, hey, you just overshared this file. Did you mean to do that? Yes, no. Let's say no, remove the share. Let's say yes, they meant to share it. Okay, we'll leave it open for 30 days. But after 30 days, we actually want to come back and remind them, hey, you left this file open. Do you still mean to share this with X, Y, and Z vendor? So what we see with a lot of our customers is as those end user engagements start to happen with the end users, there's actually more engagement over time because they're learning that, oh, hey, I'm actually overexposing, oversharing data that I shouldn't be.
Right. Yeah. I've seen a growing number of the SaaS platforms out there deploy or create an end user portal. So they're not just, we've always said security is everybody's job. An admin don't know, the correct file permissions for every single file in their tenant. And I have seen a growing number create these end user portals to make it not just an admin tool that only admins utilize, but providing some of that visibility down to the end users. From your discussions with admins and probably end users, what's your feeling on the general awareness of people when it comes to document and data security?
I think there's awareness.
How are we doing?
Yeah.
How are we doing out there?
Yeah. Specifically, Rose and I, how are our documents?
So I think there's awareness that there's a problem for sure, because we're talking to a lot of organizations that they know this is a problem. But I think there's two things they struggle with today. Often with the existing, let's say, native capabilities, often at times, they're not getting the visibility they need. Maybe there's a standard layer of the visibility they need, but they're not getting enough visibility that they feel like they can make educated decisions on where do they need to investments in from a remediation standpoint. I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is, from a remediation standpoint, how do I actually build in policies that are scalable, one, but two, that are actually solving for problems that we care about? And that goes back to the visibility piece. You can let's say, block down sharing to the entire organization. That most likely is not going to go over well, though, because you need to share. That's how businesses run. We're working. Right. Us three have a shared document with questions. We have shared documents with customers, with contractors, with vendors. You need to be able to work, but you need to be able to have controls in place how to do it. So I think with the security world, I think there's the mindset that this is a problem, but I think there's often sometimes the lack of how big do I know this problem is. So a lot of times we'll hook up to an organization and they're like, wow, I have 10x the amount of public assets and external assets that I could ever even think of. And once they that pops in their eyes, they're like, wow, now I have 50 ideas around the remediation strategies I need to take to do that. But I think there's the awareness the problem is there. It's just how big is this problem and how much of an investment do I need to make to actually solve this problem?
Going off of that, I'm curious what you think what's one piece of advice you might give to an organization that doesn't necessarily have any of these policies today and is looking at how they might implement some data control policies in their organization?
Yeah, I think the first state is, and regardless of what SaaS applications you're using, is leverage the existing capabilities to start to get an understanding of what your exposure is, whether it's in Google Workspace, whether it's in Microsoft, even Salesforce. There's foundational understanding of what is the exposure that we may have, who has access to what applications. And then you're probably going to understand, it's like, hey, this is not telling me enough. Then you can start to look at the broader SaaS security landscape world that can start to give you a risk assessment of what your SaaS security landscape is. What applications are you using today? What's the exposure of those applications? How many overprivileged admins do you have? All those different things. I think the first step is always you have to get the visibility. Because if you don't get the visibility, you can't make educated decisions on where do you want to make investments. Because maybe you get the visibility and you're like, okay, I'm willing to accept this risk for another 6-7 months. Let's check back on this, and then I'm going to make this investment. But maybe you get the visibility like, wow, okay, tomorrow I need to go and remediate and fix all of this. And that's the decision that you want to empower, I think, the admin and security teams with, is to be able to have the educated data to make decisions on where do they want to fit this into their roadmap.
Nope. Okay.
No.
He lost
I
it.
didn't have a question.
You were going to say something as I started talking, and I was like, nope, it's gone. Okay. So I think we have a good idea about, what DoControl is, and our listeners obviously have heard a lot of talk about this space in general, and like how to develop workflows and things to consider. As the SaaS landscape continues to evolve, what do you think are some of the key areas of innovation and development that DoControl is prioritizing? And what's next, right? Like what's next for DoControl, but what's next for the space also? Like, what do you think is going to be the upcoming major areas of concern?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say it over and over and everyone's talking about it, but AI is obviously the largest concern in the SaaS world today. How you're protecting AI, who has access to AI, how you're leveraging it across your business is the number one priority. And I don't think, people are starting to tackle it. I don't think everyone has tackled it to the scalable point where people feel comfortable using it today. Like even today, I don't think people feel comfortable AI embedded in some solutions today. They still want to know how you're using that AI within your solution today, if it's open source, all those different things. AI from a security standpoint is still a massive issue that I think there's going to be areas of, I think in the next 6-7 months, you're going to see some areas of growth in that. But I still think that's probably the top priority. And Colin, I see you have maybe a comment there.
Yeah. AI does offer, as we all know, huge advantages, but it can get things wrong. It can hallucinate. And, if you are relying on it being used in your SaaS management platform or your security platform, your SPMP, SaaS Posture Management Platform. Yes. SaaS Security Posture. Yeah.
There you go.
Whatever the acronym is. Then you've got to have 100% faith in it, and there can be zero hallucinations. But then even at the moment, you can have those platforms and you can have an agent, an IT support person with alert fatigue, or, accidentally swipes it off of their phone and archives it as opposed to reading it.
But I think on the other side, Colin, right, we've got organizations that are starting to use AI, and some of those AI tools have pretty astounding context into our organization.
Yes.
And we don't always know what they're doing with that data.
Well, that's on when the security side of AI usage comes from. That's why, there is a big fear, and every admin should have a big fear of free AI usage. You either need to be locking it down or you need to be paying for it. And you need to be,
you need to be paying for it to be walled off.
I've had other discussions about this. It's not something that you can ignore. You need to have a policy, just like you have an acceptable use policy and an IT policy. You need to have an AI usage policy. Your finance and legal need to consider how it's being used, for client work. It needs to be a paid for service, so that the data that you're putting in and how it's interacting with your data is protected under that platform's, terms of service and agreement, and not being indexed. Nobody should be another Samsung and have their corporate data being indexed and publicly shared. That's an old example, but there's probably hundreds of them happening. I hear of companies saying, our users are using ChatGTP and copying and pasting stuff in. So yeah, it is that big. Will DoControl are they looking to do auditing and visibility into those AI platforms as well, and
Yeah.
surface that?
So what we can do today is, from the Shadow Apps OAuth application standpoint, we can surface the AI applications that you have integrated through your Google OAuth token that are integrated across your Google Workspace suite or your Microsoft suite. So if they have read-write access, if they have just read, just write, what's the risk profile? So we have a third-party tool that's helping us identify the risky level of an application. So we are starting to get into that space, and I think we're going to further invest in that, because it is for sure a concern across not just our customers, just the market in general. There's obviously a lot of benefits of AI, but there's also a lot of concerns about that. And I think, at some point they're going to start to, we're going to make progress from the security side, but, there's still, I think, a lot of room for growth in that area. Yep. 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 Exactly.
That's like every CEO's dream.
Yep. Exactly. And I think it's no doubt a continued spacing and grow, and we're definitely going to start to embed it into our product. And I think one of the second pillars I was going to talk about, it kind of leads to this, is kind of that IDTR space, so that identity space. I do see that something that's, there's a lot of SaaS players starting to heavily invest in that. And I think, DuControl is going to continue to that, because I think it's great to get overall visibility to your exposure of your SaaS data. What you're really trying to understand is you're trying to stop risky events from happening. And what causes risky events? Users cause risky events for the most part, insider threat management. And be able to actually identify from all different SaaS applications how a user is within your organization and actually score that user of their SaaS risk. You can use that, I think, for a couple of different things. One, you can actually start to educate users on, hey, you have like 50 OAuth applications downloaded and like 10,000 publicly exposed assets, and you're a sales rep and you have an admin right to Salesforce. Nothing wrong with you, but that's a huge risk to our business. We need to go and invest in that. But also connecting that with, there's thousands of SaaS apps businesses are using today. Getting the context from all those SaaS apps, and starting to put AI on top of that to actually start to risk score those users and build a story on how a user is, a security journey throughout the organization, I think is something that's going to continue to make big investments in the next, I think, 6-7 months.
For sure. One of the things I've commented before is that platforms like these are only as strong as the catalog of integrations they support. So
Yep.
Can you tell us about the catalog of integrations that DuControl supports, and what sort of apps do y'all prioritize to add?
Yeah, so the top applications that we focus on are really the top SaaS collaboration tools that businesses are using today. So Microsoft 365, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. So Google Workspace, Google Drive, Google Chat, Slack. And Slack's a big, and that was going to be one of my third ones, kind of the innovations. I think Slack's kind of like the new email today. People are sending whatever they want, whenever they want, over email.
For yes.
For better or worse, like Slack is often the new way, or Teams, the new way people are communicating, but there's not the same security protocols that often email has today. There's a huge email security infrastructure that's kind of the starting off as a company. You start with email security, but Slack and Teams don't have that. And I think that's going to start to come to light definitely in the next couple of months. And then the other integrations are Salesforce, what else? Jira, the Confluence suite, like the Jira suite. And those are really kind of like the bread and butter, and then GitHub. And then from a supporting application standpoint, we have like SuccessFactors, Bamboo HR, Workday, HiBob, CrowdStrike, Okta, Azure Directory. And those are kind of what we call the data enrichment applications that give us better context into who those users are and how do we actually have accurate alerts and accurate workflows. And we also, from the data security side, we do Zoom and a lot of the cloud recording software as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So you sort of sit outside of the end user lifecycle management, because there's a lot of platforms that like to embed themselves in that lifecycle management with the onboarding, the creation of users, and the offboarding. But you're sort of above that, to the side. So you'd be a CISO SOC type tool as opposed to a standard IT team operating, creating accounts, managing users, etc.
Correct. How we see it is, so let's say you're Okta and you have all your applications sitting under Okta. And let's say someone leaves the company, you remove them from Okta. Great. They've removed all access. But what hasn't been removed is if they shared stuff with their personal email a day before they left the company. That's something that's the added layer that DuControl is kind of adding to that offboarding process, that something like Okta or those IDP tools are not going to necessarily solve for today.
Right.
It's not going to like do a threat assessment of an offboarded employee's stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, which can be a mess. I can personally say I've transferred drive files from an employee who left to their manager or whoever, and only to find out 2, 3, 5 years later that there was forgive my French, a clusterfuck hiding in there.
Yep.
Of just like mismanaged or misshared files or things that just didn't need to be there or exist anymore. But
yeah, it's very difficult for those managers when they, a lot of companies work on that process of, Bob leaves, all the files go to Mary, their manager, on Friday automatically. But, Mary doesn't have any understanding of Bob's files. And then if Bob was previously the manager of Paul and has now inherited all of Paul's files, now Mary's the owner of all
two
of
steps
them.
removed from
I've seen that happen. Certainly it's very difficult when you have a lot of, thankfully there haven't been that, touch wood, there haven't been that many rifts happening from what I've seen. But I know a couple of years ago when everybody was every company seemed to be doing those large-scale reduction in forces, it could get very, very difficult with those document transfers. So, Matt, as we get towards the end, what's the one thing you would want end users to know and admins to know about security, not just specific to the capabilities of DuControl, but sort of the industry on a whole?
Yeah, I think the industry, and it's been especially in the past 3 or 4 years, I think there's been a ton of innovation in the startup world that are really kind of disrupting some of the legacy players and how you're solving some of these key problems, whether it be the cloud security world, the SaaS security world, there's the DSPM world. There's a lot of players out there really disrupting the market that I think can solve crucial problems much more efficiently and easier than how it's been solved in a legacy way today. And I would encourage people to kind of look at those solutions and see if they can solve something faster and more efficiently and even more effectively than they have in the past. If you think about I think Rose, we were chatting earlier, if you were going to try to remediate, let's say 10,000 Google Drive assets that were publicly exposed, think about them. You can't even imagine the math of the amount of time that would take, but you can do that as a click of a button today. With various solutions. Same thing with the cloud security world, whether it's with a Wiz or a Palo Alto or the Orcas of the world. And I think there's a lot of the startup solutions that are solving problems in a very unique and efficient way that I think can help security teams, I think, move away from the legacy players and really start to adopt a modern way and have a modern security stack.
I mean, that's for the best, I think. I have worked alongside security teams that have teams of people who just read reports and remediate alerts, and and like that's their whole life. They don't really get to participate in the strategy or the even take a step back to look at the big picture and see like, okay, what else should we be looking at, or like what themes are we seeing, things like that. So because they're just so like bogged down in the trenches. So it would be nice.
Exactly. Yeah, false positives is like it's still a massive issue in the industry, and I think companies are taking a unique way to try to solve for that. But false positives are still drowning security teams day in and day out.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, Matt, we've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you for the last half an hour ish, hearing about DuControl and talking about identity and security posture management. I did get it right this time.
Security posture management. You did it finally.
It's really just SaaS data security. Someone just came up with a nice term.
Yeah. But I do love. I think. I do love DuControl.io's sort of tagline on the center of the page, the multi-layer defense for SaaS applications. And yes, we do all need multi-layer of defenses with all of our SaaS applications.
It's not a first layer world anymore.
Exactly.
No. It's a lot more complicated. So, but yeah, there we are. Another episode of SaaS Showdown. Thank you, Rose, for your time. Thank you, Matt, for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Matt.
Awesome.
And good to see you, Colin.
Awesome. Thanks, Rose. Thanks, Colin.